Hello all. Today I wanted to do something a bit different and a bit fun too, because technically I'm taking a holiday and for me that just means I get to write about and hang out about the Age of Sail. But today I want to look at probably the most famous fictional pirate ship at this very moment, and that's the Jackdaw, and ask the question on whether or not it would actually be a good pirate ship. Because yes, while the game Black Flag and its remaster might not be remotely accurate when it comes to Age of Sail combat or ship design during the 1700s, they're fun. And quite often, the introduction of younger people on this topic and era, and we shouldn't as adults stop and gatekeep younger people from falling in love with this era like we have. We can't all start with Master and Commander and His Majesty's sloop Sophie. Sometimes we start with Jack Sparrow, or Edward Kenway. So today, let's have a look at the Jackdaw, and ask ourselves whether or not she would be a good pirate ship in, say for example, she was in our, real world. Remember to like, comment, and hype the video if you enjoy, and let's get into it. Now, fun fact, the ship is quite different actually gun-wise in the original versus the resynced version of the game. Notably, she's missing 10 guns in the remaster, mostly from this second deck here, and that is below the cabin. She's also missing a mortar and a few other changes occurred, but for argument's sake we're just going to look at the original and if need be, bring up the remaster. I should clarify, this video is in no way whatsoever sponsored by Ubisoft. I have not taken a single dollar from them. I just thought it would be a fun topic to examine. Now, to start with, she is a brig, which in-game is quite a small ship compared to naval vessels such as frigates, which mind you in the game they're not really frigates at all, but that's another topic, and man-of-wars, which are the representation of ships of the line, and they all seem to be 100 plus guns, which just, again, most ships of the line were not 100 guns. The 74 and the 64 were far more common than the 100 gun ship of the line. Mostly for cost reasons. Even at its height, the British Empire couldn't afford entire fleets of first rates, which is why during the Napoleonic Wars, the majority of the British lines of battle were 74 gun ships. 100 gun ships are kind of the oddity here. A brig itself is actually a fantastic choice for the game setting from a gameplay perspective, but also as a pirate ship in general, because it kind of plays into that sort of idyllic pirate ship sort of vibe. Although, in reality, it actually makes it one of the largest pirate ships during the entire time period just by dint of existence. This is actually something Kenway sarcastically points out to Hornigold during the game, saying, "Is it envy because mine's bigger than yours?" in reference to Hornigold's schooner. What a lot of people don't realise though is that generally speaking, pirate ships are quite small vessels. This here, the simple sloop, was actually the preferred vessel for pirates during this period. And I pointed this out during my video on Port Royal last week. There's a couple reasons why too. And it really comes down to, the sailing plan. These ships could sail far closer to the wind than a traditional larger square-rigged vessel. And when ships during this period, for example, with ships such as this, a simple Cerberus-class frigate in the 1700s, when they would give pursuit, a sloop could simply just turn away and escape. Sloops with this design could easily outrun these chasing ships through maneuverability. They also didn't take as many crew when it came to manning them compared to a larger ship. And they also have a shallower draft, which is perfect for shallow waters, for example, around the Bahamas with all of its sand cays and banks. The more famous pirates of the era though, they used larger ships, and they became known for it, and famously Charles Vane would actually operate the brigantine Ranger for a time. But the thing is, she wasn't anywhere near as well armed as what the in-game Jackdaw, or in the in-game Ranger for you for that matter, was armed with. For example, this here is the brig in-game that they've called the Ranger. In reality, this is what the real Ranger likely would have looked like. Notice the drop in firepower, the drop in size, and the drop in sail plan. This is still a significantly large pirate ship for the era, and it's a lot smaller than what the game is telling you it would be. It was quite rare actually for pirates to use ships of the size of the Jackdaw. The only really comparable ships in size are those of famous pirates such as Blackbeard and Sam Bellamy, who used ships such as the Queen Anne's Revenge and the Wider Galley, both former slave ships that were upgraded to around 18 to 40 guns at the highest ranges of estimates, which probably aren't even close to accurate. The Queen Anne's Revenge is probably the biggest outlier in all of the Golden Age of piracy because it just wasn't the norm, and Blackbeard himself didn't even keep it for that long, as many people would believe. And even then, the number of guns, 40, well, that too is very suspect. The claim that the Queen Anne's Revenge had at most 40 cannons, now, this is suspect for a number of reasons. Firstly, because we have found the wreck of the ship, and only 30 were recovered, but this can kind of be explained away that during her grounding, guns would have been thrown overboard to lighten the ship to try and get her off the sandbar. But the reason I find the number of 40 guns to be so suspect is that 38 to 40 guns is the number of guns that large frigates generally sported during the Age of Sail, particularly during the later Age of Sail, namely 1700s to 1800s, around the Napoleonic era. You know, when ships like Constitution and Trincomalee, ships that we have examples of today that survived, well, they're operating a similar number of guns. It's a really convenient number to throw out that makes Blackbeard's ship fit into the context of a proper pirate frigate, and it's probably why Wikipedia calls it a frigate, when in reality, the term frigate, while somewhat loose, is a bit more complex than just certain number of guns. The Queen Anne's Revenge, though, make no mistake, was a huge pirate ship, and even if she just, and I'm using massive air quotes here, had 30 guns, that's still a lot, which makes the next bit about the Jackdaw the hardest bit to believe. See, the Jackdaw is only about 27-ish or so meters long, and on that hull in the original game, she has 46 guns, 2 mortars, and multiple swivels. Even during the remake with fewer guns, it's still 36 broadside guns on a 27-meter hull. Now, this wouldn't work for a couple of key reasons. 1. Weight. Simply put, the guns are heavy, very heavy, and that many guns on a small hull is going to have the ship doing its best Vaza impression the moment a wave even enters the general vicinity. 2. Space. Now, this is the one that always kind of bugged me, and it's the space. See, here on a normal ship of the period, as you can see on screen with a photo of the gun deck of HMS Trincomalee, a 38-gun Leda-class frigate, which in my opinion is the greatest of all sailing frigate designs due to its balance of firepower, speed, and strength, notice how far apart the guns are from one another. There is a significant space for the gun crews which would number around half a dozen or so men to a gun, provided they're fighting, obviously, one side of the ship, and they're not having to fight both sides of the vessel. Now let's take it back and compare that to the Jackdaw. There is simply no space for the crew to man or fire the guns without basically phasing through each other, or, knocking each other over and crushing each other's feet with dropping balls on them. It's a problem. It's a big problem, and one you really just have to disbelieve your head for. Also, I want to point out, ships aren't tall. The decks on these sailing vessels are not tall. I have part of my scalp embedded into the beams on the lower decks of HMS Victory and Trincomalee to prove this. But they're not that small. To fire some of these guns, it almost looks like men would have to be crawling around on the gun decks. The gun decks are not that small. Even today, if you go and stand on the lower decks of the Victory, I'm about 6 foot or so, bit more, and I can still stand up on the lower decks. Granted, I can't walk straight on the lower decks because I take my scalp off, as I mentioned, but they're not that small. And just putting Edward next to them on the ship, you can sort of see, yeah, you got to suspend your imagination just a bit here. And number 3, the big one, weight. Oh, hang on, didn't we do this one? Well, yes, we did. But on this point, I don't want to talk about the weight of the guns themselves, I want to talk about weight of shot. See, shot weight plays a huge part in what ships can handle what guns. Genuinely, the best explanation of this comes from Patrick O'Brien and the first book, Master and Commander. In that book, Jack, taking command of Sophie, is absolutely horrified and dismayed to learn she only has 4-pounders. They're essentially big musket pop guns, when you compare them to larger 8 or 12-pounder guns. And because of this, he feels like he won't be able to take any prizes with the ship, so he seeks out heavier guns to put on the bow of his new sloop. The new guns weigh her down at the bow a little, but when he fires them, the carpenter and the crew are horrified because the ship's timbers start screaming and cracking under the weight of shot. In the 4th book, The Mauritius Command, when in command of the old 64-gun Raisonnable, The ship is forced to fire a slow, rippling broadside because she's going to break her timbers apart if she fires them all at full chat. While this is fiction, of course, it does show a genuine issue of these older ships, and it explains it in a really down-to-earth and fantastic way if you're not used to the concept. And it comes down largely, and it explains the issue of timber in older vessels, or timber in general in ship design. Because when it comes to the strength of these timbers at handling broadsides, it does vary ship to ship. For example, if the old USS Constitution or HMS Victory were to fire a full broadside with full charges of powder today, I can promise you the damage to the ships would be horrific, likely fatal in the Constitution's sake, probably in the Victory's sake too. I only say Constitution more because she's in the water. But it would tear the ship's timbers apart. And this is a big problem across the entire Age of Sail, and if you try and put, say, a 24-pound gun on a ship that is not rated for it, you will do serious damage, if not destroy large sections of your timbers. And that brings us to the Jackdaw. The ship is very old when you get it. It's called the El Dorado, and it's on its way back to Spain. Now, I'm not sure if this says it in the new version, but in the original version of the game, there was a little trinket thing you could get with the game when you first bought it that explains the ship was on its way back to Spain to essentially be broken up and gotten rid of because it was old and kind of decrepit. And this is kind of backed up in the game too, because the first mission after you get it, when you take it to an island to find some stuff to refit and, learn to hunt and stuff, there's a whole conversation with your new quartermaster / first mate about how crap the thing is and how it's falling apart. I can promise you, if you stuff 40 guns on that hull and fire a full simultaneous broadside, and not just that, a double-shotted broadside or treble-shotted broadside, which you can do under certain circumstances in that game, you will turn your ship into a giant party popper and end up very quickly as a submarine on the bottom of the ocean. So yeah, long story short, the Jackdaw doesn't work as a pirate ship because she quite literally would sink herself the moment she fired her comically close together two heavy guns, and that is if she did not roll over and Vaza herself first. There are a few other key points here that aren't great when it comes to the ship. Firstly, throughout the game you just strap metal onto the hull to increase its armor. Now, metal weighs a lot, and I want to point out that the Caribbean heat is stifling, and the ship would be absolutely unbearable for the crew to live in. And then we get to the ram, which just looks off, and I try and not put it on the ship as much as I can. And look, I'm no expert on hydrodynamics, but hydrodynamically, I have serious questions on whether or not this would work, let alone whether or not it would just tear the bow off the Jackdaw if it was ever actually used on a large target. One last little point is the mortars. While great fun in the game, they just don't work in either iteration of the game. In the first game, they're up on the bow, which, if fired, I promise you, would shatter the ship's timbers due to the extreme weight that a mortar shot and stress that a mortar shot will put on the hull, and this will lead to serious damage. But in the remake, the mortar is positioned behind the foremast. Now, it's in a great position in terms of the ship accepting the force of a mortar firing. However, I'm no expert, but firing a mortar directly into a mast, in my opinion, is not conducive, again, in my opinion, to the health of said mast. And there's a reason why ketchers and mortar ships look like this and not like this. Small thing, but it is an issue, and it's a pretty glaring one. It's probably one of the only ones that bug me just because it's so in-your-face obvious. But again, that said, it is just a game. Enjoy it if you want to, don't play it if you don't. The Jackdaw itself is a fantastic ship. The design, it's great. The choice of a brig, phenomenal. The fact she can fight man-of-war is, we'll say questionable. But I get it from a gameplay perspective, and I get it from an entertainment perspective. The fact it is a brig, again, great. The fact it's so overgunned, while I get from a gameplay point, not great. That is what takes it from the realm of possibility to the realm of impossibility. The ship, when you probably upgrade it 2 or 3 times to have maybe 12 guns per side as broadside cannons, and then no mortars, that's probably pretty accurate to what it would be if it was a real pirate ship. It would make sense in that sort of situation. it would work as a real pirate ship in that situation. It's quite large, but that's not to say even up to 20 guns wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for a ship that large. There just wouldn't be a high caliber. But either way, if you don't like the game, then don't play it. I personally adored the original, and it played a very important part of my life as a teenager during a really difficult time for me. And for that, I love it. The original, that is. I have some problems with the remaster, even though it is gorgeous, visually speaking. Remember, always, choose the lesser of two evils, and don't gatekeep the study of this wonderfully complex and underappreciated period of history just because of an arcadey game. You never know. A kid playing Black Flag Resync today could, in 40 years' time, be leading the charge to preserve victory or constitution, or another wooden old windjammer that we love and adore. The more representation this period gets, the better we all are for it, and even if we don't like the game, we just don't have to play it. But we can appreciate that an entire new generation of kids is being opened up to this wonderful world of history that has been closed off and forgotten about for so damn long.